Welcome back to another episode of the Odd or God Pod, where we talk about sobriety, spirituality, and everything in between. This week we have a very special episode. We have Damen joining us. Damen, why don't you introduce yourself?
So I'm Damen. I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. I do kind of look at them a little separately. My most recent sobriety date is December 31st of 2022. And I gotta say, it's been an interesting journey since I started. So, I first started getting into recovery November of 2020. Had a couple of bumps in the road, but started figuring things out and working my way through it.
Love that, man. I met Damen for the first time. I had went to the treatment center that he was at for an H&I, and we didn't actually hit it off. When we first met.
That's putting it lightly.
Damen was a real big me hater. He hated me right off
Absolutely
the bat, and I did, and I had all I wanted to do was to make him my friend, and he wouldn't want to be my friend for the longest time.
Sure. We'll roll with that, dude. That's what we'll roll with.
No, but I've known Damen pretty much since he came on the scene out here in the Valley, and that was about 2020. And, he's grown to be one of my closest friends. I'm super happy to have him here on the podcast with us. Why don't you go ahead and just get into a little bit about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now?
Oh, man. Where do I begin? It's funny. I sent you that post, didn't I? No, I didn't. I pulled up my Facebook because I deleted social media God knows how long ago. And I had posted when I was 18 years old, I'm like, time to drink like a 400-pound alcoholic, right? And it's like, that really hit home because that's how I thought of drinking. It's like, it wasn't a problem in my mind, but I knew it's like, I'm going to drink like a fucking alcoholic. Mm-hmm. Like, I am a degenerate. I want to do drugs. I want to drink. I want to do it all to excess. And for the longest time, I just thought, I'm young and I like to party. For the longest time, 16 to like 22, 23. But then life started to really unravel. You start getting the arrests. I think I have 13 times I've been arrested, 2 DUIs, a whole lot of public intoxes, all kinds of stuff. And even in those moments, until I got my second DUI, I was just like, I'm reckless. It's not a big deal. These aren't that big of a problem.
You're just the sloppy drunk. You just need to reel it in.
I need to reel it in. I need to get a little more control under it. And then, that second DUI, it was the first time I was like, man, this is really a problem. Like, I need to address this. And the next day, I went to the first AA meeting ever. And that was back in 2014, end of 2013, 2014. So I was, 22 years old. And I walked into this meditation meeting. It was an 11th step. And they meditated for 30 minutes of the meeting. I had never meditated in my entire life. And I sat there in quiet and I kept opening my eyes and everyone was like peacefully meditating. And I'm like, are these guys fucking crazy? How is this going to keep me sober? And, I had a little bit of salt on it from then. Court forced me to go to 2 AA meetings a week. I ended up on house arrest. And the only place I was allowed to go was work, home, and the AA meeting hall. So I dove in because I just didn't want to be stuck at home. I'm like, I'm going to go to a meeting every chance I can because I don't want to be stuck at home doing absolutely nothing. It was miserable. And, I picked up some things, but I never started actually working the program. Right? Like, I listened to these people with serious sobriety talk about, get a sponsor, work the steps, go to meetings. It's like, you got to find a concept of God, whatever that may be for you. And through all of that, I was just like, well, I'm coming to meetings and I'm staying sober, right? Or actually, I should backtrack a little bit. Before that, before I was on probation, I was not staying sober and I was going to meetings.
Right. Yeah. Back in 2018, when I had to go to 30 AA meetings for my first DUI, I remember I would like show up to them just like drunk and just sit there and be like, huh.
I had this old guy tell me one time, he's like, just pick up a newcomer chip at every meeting you go to until you get to 30 days. He's like, and then trade in all your newcomer chips. And while I was going through that legal process, I was literally going to like one a week. And I was picking up a newcomer chip, but I couldn't stay sober for 30 days. And I had like 16 to 20 of these key tags. And I was like, here are all of these. It took me, one chip a week for 4 or 5 months to finally get that first 30-day chip. And, going through all of that is just oblivious to the fact that it's like, I am an alcoholic and I really need to take this seriously.
Right.
And then, I picked up and I ran from Utah and I came out to Arizona thinking, if I move, this will fix my problem. Like, I'm going to get away from this. And when I got here, I did a pretty good job of managing it. I can't lie. I was a weekend warrior for a good amount of time. I kept things under control to an extent. I mean, I would drink to excess every single time I drank, but it was like, okay, Friday and Saturday. But just like with any good alcoholic, that progression kicked back in. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, I can drink on Sunday if I stop early enough to get up for work. And then it would carry over and I'm like, a couple of drinks during the week isn't a big deal. And then the next thing I know, I'm sitting in my apartment by myself on a Wednesday night, blackout drunk, and having to get up for work the next day. And that just became my life for 3 or 4 years. It's like, that's all I was doing. It's like, I'm going to drink. I'm going to drink to excess. And then I'd say around the end of 2019 was when I was like, I need to do something, right? And I started trying to handle the problem on my own. I'm like, I'll get it together. I won't drink. And I would get like 5 days. And then I would drink for an entire week. And then I'd get like another 4 or 5 days. And then I'd drink for an entire week. And I started to realize, I don't have a grasp on this. I have no handle. I can't stop. I have no control over it. There's nothing I can do to stop drinking. And I walked into my first AA meeting. And at the time I had my motorcycle still. And I wish I could remember the story, but there's a story in the back about this guy that rode a motorcycle. And it was all old timers. It was a big book study. And they're like, oh, we're going to read this story. And my mind twisted that to the darkest thing. Here are all these people just trying to help me. They're like, he might be able to relate to this. I had maybe 8 hours sober at that point. They're like, maybe he'll relate. Maybe we can help him out. Maybe we can get him out of this situation. And my mind thought, these fucking assholes are trying to pull me into their cult by picking a story that they think relates to me.
How dare they try to help me by picking something super relatable to me?
Super relatable. And the thing is, the whole story...
You almost took it as like a personal attack. Like, how dare they? They're trying to manipulate me.
And that's exactly how I felt. And then I'm like, fuck it. I'm not doing this. I'm stepping aside. I'm going to go do something else. And then the pandemic happened right after. And I'm sure there's quite a few people who experienced the pandemic as active alcoholics, as active addicts. And that was a rough time because I can't go anywhere. There's no reason for me to not drink. I stopped trying to hide it as much. I would show up to work still drunk, like completely drunk. But no one could tell because it's like, oh, a couple of pumps of hand sanitizer. I'm wearing a mask. We have to stay 6 feet apart. It's like, I might look a little bit rough, but half of that's hidden underneath this mask. And that just led to that final breaking point where I reached that desperation that was necessary. It's like, oh man, I can't do this. Like, I don't want to live anymore. Like, I'm going to throw in the towel. It's like, I'm not going to kill myself because I'm too much of a coward to do that.
Right.
But I can't live the way that I'm living anymore.
Right. It's like you're just stuck in limbo between like, well, I don't necessarily want to continue living, but you also don't want to have to do whatever it takes to just end your life. So now you're just in this middle period. You're like in a purgatory almost.
Mm-hmm. Dude, and that's it. That's exactly how to describe it as a purgatory. And I mean, I was going crazy. Like, I was having serious paranoia issues. I thought people were like trying to convince me to either go to rehab or kill myself, which wasn't the case. That was just my mind seeing things that weren't there because those were the only options I saw. And I finally broke down one day and I called my mom like a good alcoholic because she's one of the few people that would pick up the phone and was like, hey, I really need some help. And I remember talking to her vaguely. I mean, I was pretty drunk when I made the call, but sitting there and she's like, it's about time. She's like, I haven't heard from you in a couple of months. And I'm like, it hasn't been that long. It really had. She's like, I haven't heard from you in months, Damen. I haven't heard from you since like, God, I want to say it was probably like May, and at this time it's November.
Wow.
Like, yeah. So I was just off the deep end on my own, isolating. So she came, picked me up, took me out to rehab. And then, you know, I mean, that's where the whole journey began.
Right. The seed was planted like almost over half a decade prior, and the journey began when you got into treatment. And this is one of my favorite parts about your story, and this is like what sticks out to me a lot when I think back on when I first had met you and we were getting to know each other, is that when you got out of treatment, you had your own apartment. And you were there, you went back to your own apartment, right? And you were trying to do that thing, and you stayed sober through it. Well, I think it was like 3 or 4 months.
No, it was only a month and like 2 weeks.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it was about like 4 to 6 weeks. And from that point, you decide that you were going to not renew your lease and move into sober living. So sometimes it's hard enough for people to even be like, oh, I'm going to move into sober living like after treatment. You went back to your own place and you realized that, like, could you walk us through that, like where your head was at?
Well, first and foremost, I hit the ground running when I was in treatment, which was the most important part. Like, you have to utilize that time. Like, you have to be productive. You know, I got a sponsor. I started working my steps.
He stole my sponsor.
I did. That's what you were salty about when we met. So I started working with a sponsor, started working the steps, started going through all of these things. And when I was done, thankfully, the sponsor that we shared at the time was like, well, here are the meetings, here are the places to go, these are the people you need to meet. Because that's what I really needed at that point. It's like, I'm doing the work, you know, I'm trying to pray as hard as it was at first. I'm trying to meditate, as uncomfortable as I was sitting by myself in quiet. But like, being introduced to that program was what was necessary. And then I remember being alone in that apartment and just feeling so off and so uncomfortable, because I'd been there for 2 years and all I had done is drink in that apartment. It's like there wasn't any fond memories. There wasn't anything actually fun that took place there. It was just, this is where I went to drink. This is where I hid away from the world and drank. And it really started messing with me, like being there in that place. And that's the only thing I have to associate with it. And I remember making that call and being like, dude, I can't stay here. Like, if I stay here, I'm going to drink. As much as I wanted to have that freedom and not restrict myself and not go to sober living, it was the right choice. It was what I needed. I needed to take a step back and be like, you know what? I have to give up some of these things that I've worked hard to accomplish in my life so that I can really move forward. Like, I can either stay here in this misery I've been in this whole time, or I can take a few steps back to start working forward again.
Right. And that's like a perfect way to explain it, is like, well, sometimes we do need to make those temporary sacrifices so that we can have a better foundation to like move forward on. And I would imagine at that point in your life, you were still really early in recovery. Is that like kind of when you started taking more suggestions, like when you moved back into sober living and you found out, okay, one, it's not as bad as like you thought it was going to be, and two, like you do start getting a better foundation and you start having a better idea of what your future could look like if you keep doing these things? Did that play a part into like giving you more confidence in taking people's suggestions, or?
I mean, it did help with taking the suggestions. The main thing was I wasn't disciplined. Like the big book says, it's like, we alcoholics are not disciplined. I had no discipline. I needed some form of forced structure. So they're like, you have to go to these 4 meetings. You have to have a sponsor. You have to work your steps. And it's like, okay, I needed that. Like, I needed this structure around it. You
do need to wake up and leave the house every day, and you need to do a chore, and you need to make your bed, and you need to share this living space with everybody else. Like, this isn't just for you. Like, all of these things that it's like, as grown adults, we find ourselves ill-equipped to like live in those kind of circumstances.
And the thing is, I was so used to doing everything on my time that it's like, being forced to do it, at first it sucked. I was frustrated. But then it really helped with just that natural discipline. It's like, I don't let dishes pile in my sink, as weird as that sounds. It's like I would when I was like, before I lived there. But now it's just such a habit. It's like, well, no, this needs to be taken care of. This needs to be done. And I think that would carry over even if I lived by myself right now. It would still be, hey, this needs to get done. This is the discipline that was instilled in me in just the regular life, not even the sobriety portion. But as far as the suggestions, I mean, it really introduced me to a lot, because I would say yes. It's like, if I had an opportunity to do something, I would say yes to it. And I would be lying if I said I always wanted to. Like, I can think of the times where it's like, hey, we need help moving these people. And I don't know these people. I'm not getting anything out of this. My brain says, get fucked. Like, I don't want to do that.
Kick rocks.
Kick rocks. That's not my responsibility. But I would say yes. Mainly because I just wanted people to think I was a good person.
Oh yeah, dude, that's so funny you touch on that, because it's like, for me, that was the same way for like the first, like, for pretty much like the entire first 2 years of like being in the program. I feel like I never actually did anything out of like the genuineness of like my heart. It was always just because it's like I knew I was gonna get pushback from everybody if I didn't help people out. So it was mostly just like, oh, I'm going to like help this person out just so I can tell everyone that I helped this person out and they think that I'm doing the deal. But I really couldn't have given up shit like if I helped them or not.
Exactly. That's a perfect summary of it.
Yeah.
But it did put in the habit of me of like actually helping people, right? And it's, I mean, much like anything, it takes practice, and it forced me to do it. And now when the opportunity arises, it's like I don't hesitate. It's like I know what it's like to need help and to get it. So when someone reaches out, it's like I'm going to take that opportunity to help you, not because I'm expecting anything out of it. Not like there's no other motive than the fact that I know what it's like to be on the other end of needing help. So it taught me a lot of really important life lessons. Like, just the whole sober living environment. I mean, one, dealing with the people is rough. Like, you get a lot of personalities, a lot of crazy people coming through. And I don't mean like dangerous crazy. I just mean they're very unique characters. And I don't know how else to describe it.
There's people that, if it wasn't for sober living, you probably would have never encountered half of the people that you did. But you were forced to not only encounter them, but live with them. Like, yes. 10 guys in a home designed for like a single family, and like shared fridge space and then the whole 9 yards, man. I mean, share a little bit about your experience with that, as far as how that set you up to like be able to, because, well, let me back up for a second, right? Because I know this, but listeners probably don't. You know, you're also, you know, in a relationship now, right? Which I feel like maybe your time in sober living and learning how to like live with other people and like be mindful and considerate of like other people in like a shared living space. Did any of those kind of things correlate to like how you know, live with your significant other now?
I mean, yeah, big time. Like, the way I live is just a person inside whatever dwelling I'm in, drastically changed, because like you said, I have that awareness now. This is not just my space. There are other person now, but there were other people when I was in sober living. And it really comes down to just fundamental life skills that I neglected. It's like, okay, it's like, this needs to get done, I'm going to take care of it. This needs to get done, I'm going to take care of it. And I mean, it does make for a much smoother relationship and living situation, because it's not an expectation of like, oh, well, I did this, so you should do this. I did this, so you should do this. I just learned that, hey, if these things need to get done, it's like I'm going to take care of it. Like, I'm used to doing this when there's 9 other guys living in the same house, like you said. One other person is like, this takes me 2 minutes. It's no big deal.
Right.
So it's like, it's extremely beneficial in that aspect. I'm sure she appreciates it. I hope she does.
Right. I have a feeling she does. I feel like she would prefer post-sober living Damen than pre-sober living Damen.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome, man. So yeah, we kind of touched on some of your time there in sober living. Why don't we just get into like what your life looks like now, the things that you do on a daily basis to, you know, continuously maintaining your sobriety today?
Dude, it's tough. Right? Getting sober is so much easier than staying sober. And it's so important that people don't expect it to get easier, because it doesn't. Life throws you curveballs. Like, stuff gets difficult. But, I mean, on a daily basis, it's like I have to maintain my connection to my higher power. Right? Whatever that is for you, you know, that's what you got to figure out how to do. You know, I pray daily. I do actually pray daily. I don't meditate daily. I wish I did. The days that I do are much better than the days that I don't. I do my nightly review sporadically, but I focus on it, and I actually do pay attention to the things I write down, which I think is of the utmost importance when you're doing it. I mean, you can do it daily, But you kind of hit points once you're at like a good, healthy point in your life where it's like, I wasn't really resentful today. I didn't have any fears that cropped up. I didn't, it's like I did my best to treat people with respect and love and care. It's like I'm not perfect by any means, but I kind of hit a point where I was, going through it and I'm like, I don't really have any of these issues. But then you neglect it for too long and they all start cropping back up. And all of a sudden I'm living in my defects. I'm not treating people with love and respect. And I have to go back and I have to reevaluate and I have to break it down.
Yeah, it's like the way somebody explained it to me is like those little like you would call it like spiritual maintenance, so to speak. And it's like it's the same thing as laundry. It's no big deal to wash a couple shirts and like a pair of socks, but it's like if you neglect your laundry for long enough, and then you end up having to do 4 or 5 loads when you could have just been doing smaller loads throughout the day to like keep your laundry clean. It's the same thing, right? Where it's just like if we're ignoring like, oh, okay, like maybe I am a little resentful at this person, but it's nothing too major. Well, then you sit on it for a month and a half, and then they do something that was even more irritating to you than the previous thing, and now it's like compounds. And then now you got a bigger issue. That's good, man. And let me ask you this, dude. And I lost my train of thought, but it's coming back around. It's working its way back around the mountain. And it was like a really good question. I had thought of it, but then I told you the laundry analogy and then I lost it. Well, why don't you just take away? I think I'm fairly confident it's going to come back to like my mind, and then I'll repeat it in my mind until I get a chance to bring it up again. But why don't you just, do you have anything that you want to talk about or?
Man, I like what you were saying about not addressing those resentments. Because I just had a recent experience of this. Like, literally yesterday. So I have my girlfriend who I love very much. And if she's listening, I do love you. But, we were sitting here and I had all these little resentments related to her that I was pushing to the side. Because it's like, oh, well, I love her. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to worry about this. And then, all these little things just kept adding on and adding on and adding on. And all of a sudden, I just like, I don't want to say I exploded because it's not like I was like yelling or we were arguing, but it's like I had all these things and I'm like, man, all of this stuff is bothering me. And ruined Saturday. Just like totally threw off the energy of the day. Both of us weren't having a great time. But it's like that's what that is. It's like I'm not addressing these little things that aren't a big deal if I discuss it in the moment. But I feel like it's not worth the discussion and I hold on to it. Because my alcoholic mind doesn't want to let go. It's like, even if it's really not a big deal, it's like, I'm going to hold on to it. And then it's going to come back up. And then it's going to come back up. And then it's going to come back up.
Right. It's like, and not only am I going to hang on to it, it's like I'm going to like compartmentalize it into this certain part of my brain so that every time you do something that even slightly annoys me, it's going to get put back on this mental spreadsheet. So when that time comes, when you try to call me on my shit or like, I'm going to bring up everything and be like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And I've got like a whole spreadsheet in my head of like, well, guess what? This is what annoys me about you,
And the problem is in that moment, I don't want to speak for her because she's not here, but it felt like we went back and forth with that Rolodex, right? Like both of us had these things that we were pushing aside because we didn't want to talk about it. We're like, just set it aside. And then all of a sudden we go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And it's like, why are we creating unnecessary conflict in our life? It's like, we're not addressing these things as we need to.
Right.
We're holding on.
And it's not even that you were creating the conflict. It was just delayed conflict. It was conflict that had already started the moment that thing that she did or that you did that irritated her. And when you didn't take the time to address it in that moment promptly, you just delayed the conflict. So it's never like, it's like a lot of the time we don't even create a lot of conflicts in our life. We just simply delay it until it like all comes together in like one moment, It's kind of wild to think about, man. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about like, so you had this little bit of a rough day yesterday. Did you guys work that out? Like, how does that look?
Yeah. I mean, both of us are very reasonable people. We both work this program. We both focus on like maintaining our sobriety first and foremost, maintaining a connection to our higher powers. And through that, after we have those discussions, we're able to self-reflect, right? And we're able to address, hey, it's like I get my part. I mean, I needed help on some of them. I had to call my sponsor and be like, can you help me break these down? Because I think she's crazy.
I need a second set of eyes on this because I'm not seeing it.
I don't see it. And then, of course, I sit there and I have someone who is separated from the problem address it and be like, hey, you're kind of an ass. And I was like, yeah, okay, thank you. I needed to hear that from an outside perspective. But, I mean, that's it. That's how it works. And then we're able to come together, have a sound conversation, and discuss these things. Because none of it's like a big, drastic problem, right? It's like these are all little things. It's like, okay, it's like I can work on the things you brought up. She said she can work on the things that I brought up. And it's like, and we can move forward. Like, this isn't some tragic, awful situation that my mind makes it out to be in the moment, right? Like, I'm thinking worst case scenario when we're having the conversation, and then afterwards it's like, oh, okay, everything's fine. It's like, I mean, I have things to work on, but overall things are fine.
Right. And I love that you brought that up, because it's like Damen is a big like sounding board for me, and there'll be times where I call him, I'm like, I feel like I'm being selfish, but I don't know. I'm just gonna run by exactly what just happened, and then you're gonna I need you to tell me if I'm in the wrong. You know what I mean? Because it's like I don't see it a lot of the time. Like, I get so caught up in a big thing for me is like communicating, right? Where it's like I could have the best intentions for like situations, but it's like if I don't communicate that to somebody else and explain to them like the reason why I feel this way is because of this, and instead just get frustrated that they don't feel the same way I do about a situation, then it's like then I build a resentment at them when it was a failure of communication. But if I don't have a network of people like Damen and other people in my life that I can call and be like, hey, I need to run this by you because I'm going through this situation with this person, and I don't think they're quite understanding what I'm trying to do. And it's like, and there's a breakdown. Right, and then usually it's like, well, you didn't tell them that's what you're trying to do. Like, you just that's like my biggest thing. Is like I'll have all of these like grand visions in my head of like, oh, this is what I want to do, and this is exactly how it's gonna be. And then I just won't actually tell anybody what those visions are, and then I'll tell them like what the end product could be, and they're like, well, how are you gonna get there? I'm like, dude, I already thought of this. Like, what are you talking about? So it's super important having that network and people to rely on, and I'm glad you're on my team. I'm glad that you're someone that I can call when I run into those situations. Now, it wouldn't be the Odd or God Pod if we didn't get to our signature segment, God Shots. Got any?
Oh man, I mean,
absolutely. Got God? Question mark.
Do you want like a whole like?
No, I literally, and here's to set the tone. We've had some like Christopher Nolan level plot twist God shots on this pod over the past couple of weeks. So I need you to bring the heat. Break it down to me like this is like a Martin Scorsese film.
All right, so we're gonna dial it back. I'm gonna tell you the night of my second DUI. So. I mean, this was truly one of the biggest, this was the first time I actually sat and thought, maybe there is a God. Like, it was just too much for me to comprehend. So I went to a concert, and...
What concert?
Let's backtrack just a little bit. So I drove my car to the light rail in Utah, and I shouldn't have because I was already too drunk to drive. So that I could hop on the light rail, went to a Wu-Tang Clan concert at the park in downtown Salt Lake, and got completely obliterated, right? Continued to just slam beer, barely remember the concert. Like, they could have not shown up and I wouldn't have known the difference. Like, I was in the back of the bar the entire time.
Give me 1 second.
All right.
Give me 1 second. Okay, I just want to make sure we're still recording.
Do you want me to go back or just keep going?
No, just keep going, bro. It's cool. I like to leave shit like that in the podcast because it's like, yeah, it's authentic. You know what I mean? No, right. This is all one take.
So I go to this Wu-Tang Clan concert, and I remember looking at my phone, and it was like 9:45. And in Utah, you cannot buy liquor after 10 o'clock. I'm like, oh shit, I gotta leave. Like, concert's not over. But I'm like, if I don't go, I can't buy more liquor before they close. So I'm like, I gotta run across the street, gotta grab a bottle before I head home. And I stop, buy a bottle of Wild Turkey, and just start popping it open and drinking it on the way to the train. Completely blackout, right? Before I even get to my car. When I finally come to, I am sitting behind the wheel of my car on train tracks. Just high-centered, tip to the side, and I'm like, oh shit. And I try to put my car back in drive, and I'm like flooring it, and I can hear the wheels spinning, and I'm like, come on, just go. Please just go. I gotta get out of here. And car wouldn't move. There was no chance. All the wheels were bent up into the car. One of them just happened to be angled so that it was rubbing against the fender, and I thought it was the ground. Was not the ground. And I'm sitting there, and I'm behind the wheel of my car, and brown out, right? Like, so I'm kind of in, kind of out, and I look up, and I see a train, and the light's beaming through the front of my car. I'm like, oh shit. And I get out of my car, and as I'm getting out, I realize the train has stopped. Okay, so this train's maybe 2 football fields away from the front end of my car. Union Pacific train. And I don't know if you know
like an actual
like
train.
an actual
like you're not talking like a subway. You're
fully
talking like
loaded.
a full-blown train.
I was on train tracks, not light rail.
Oh wow.
So there's a whole fully loaded Union Pacific train at a complete stop in front of my car.
Oh shit.
And I'm just like, oh shit, right? And I walk, and I'm too drunk to really walk, so I kind of like trip and fall and stumble my way to the sidewalk by the gate that I had blown through and gotten onto the train tracks. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm waiting, and I'm like, I'm definitely going to jail. I'm like, I can't run from this situation even, because I'm just like, I'm literally too drunk to escape. I'm like, I can't even walk. Sitting on the curb, the cops show up, and cop walks up, and he's like, hey, do you know whose car that is? My drunk ass is like, it's mine. Like,
oh, I would have been like, I have no idea. The dude hopped out and ran.
I honestly, at this point, I didn't care. I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, I don't.
You almost wanted to get caught because it would have brought you some relief, like knowing that it's just like, oh, well, it's over.
So this cop tries to give me a field sobriety test. He's like, all right, I need you to stand up and walk in a straight line. I immediately fell over. They ended it there. I told him before, I was like, I'll just blow him the breathalyzer. Like, dude, I'm drunk. Like, there's no need. Like, just take me in. I don't want to deal with any of this right now. Like, I'd rather sit in a jail cell. So I had to sit there and wait for a tow truck to come and pull my car off, because they won't let you leave until the car's been removed. So I'm sitting in the back of the cop car just waiting. He takes me to the police station, and he's like, hey, I don't want to take you to jail. He's like, you've been to jail too many times. It's not working. He's like, you need to do something different. He's like, I need you to call somebody and have them come pick you up. My mind immediately thinks of any friend that would come pick me up at a police station. And he could see those wheels turning. And he's like, no. Immediate family. He's like, immediate family.
He's like, call your dad.
He's like, call your dad. Call your mom. I called my grandma because she was the only one nearby. So my grandma comes and picks me up at jail. I don't know what they talked about, but he talked to my grandma for a good hour outside. Like, I'm assuming laying out like, hey, this is what this guy needs. Like, he's fucked. Like, and he has nothing going on. He is going to kill himself, kill someone else, end up in jail or prison. Like, his life is not going the way it needs to be going. So she picks me up. She takes me home. Now for the God shot. So all of this is happening, and my dad works for the light rail. He works in the control room for the light rail. And he's sitting there, and he started getting phone calls. Hey, there's a car on the alignment. There's a car on the alignment. So he calls a full stop to the light rail. And they're like, we can't find this car. We don't know where it is. This is why I was sitting in my car so long. They were looking in the wrong spot. So there's about a 3-block gap where I was at between Union Pacific and the light rail. So they're looking 3 blocks away, and they're like, we can't find it, but people keep calling and saying, hey, there's a car here. You guys need to come get this. And while that's happening, my dad is like, well, I'm going to call Union Pacific and tell them to put their trains at an emergency stop. So my dad picks up the phone, calls Union Pacific, says, hey, you need to do an emergency stop. Those trains take miles to stop. So that train that stopped 2 football fields away from me in an emergency stop scenario would have plowed right through the front of my car while I was sitting there. Had my dad not been like, well, maybe I should call them real quick and tell them they need to put a full stop to their trains.
Wow.
So in that moment, he had no idea it was me. Obviously, he doesn't know that that's me sitting in the car on those train tracks. He didn't know until the next day. And it was just one of those moments when we were like sharing our side of the story with each other. It's like, holy shit. Like, you saved my life. Didn't even know he did it. So, I mean, that was literally the first time I'm like, maybe there is a God and maybe I need to start looking at how I'm living my life.
Wow. I mean, that's just so incredible. Like, my favorite thing ever is just every single person that comes on this pod listening to their God shots. Because it's like, you can't sit here and tell me that, like, that wasn't God in that situation. Like, you are high-centered on the train tracks. They're calling the light rail, but you're technically on Union Pacific fucking rails, not even near where they think you are. And then it comes out, it's your own dad who tells them, hey, emergency stop. There's like a car somewhere. We don't know where it's at. And then the next day you're fucking talking to him and it's like, oh, that was me.
Oh shit.
Wow.
So that, like I said, that was the first moment that I'm like, maybe there is a God. Like, that was just eye-opening. It didn't keep me sober. Like, one single God shot that's that intense isn't enough to keep you sober. But it definitely scared me to a point where I started actually looking at my life. Even if it still took years, it's like I started actually looking at like, oh man, what am I doing? How do I try to get a grasp on this?
Wow. Incredible, man. Well, I mean, do you have any other ones?
Not that are immediately coming to mind.
Boo. No, I'm just kidding. No, that's awesome, man. And what we also do, so like we always ask people about their God shots. Also, like, I have to ask you, man, because this is another one of my favorite parts of like every podcast. If you could go back, let's say if you could go back to 2014, after that DUI, you're going to court mandated AA classes. If you were sitting in one of those AA meetings at that time, and you saw you sitting there showing up drunk just because that was the only place that you could go, what would you tell yourself?
Dude, I learned this from my current sponsor. And it's, you got to extend that hand. Because here's the thing. I went to those meetings and people would like make the suggestions. But if someone had actually come up to me and been like, hey, I'll be your sponsor. Call me every day. I probably would have started doing it. But I just showed up nonchalantly, sat in the back. It's like, when you see those people, you got to try to make an effort, right? Like, that's what it comes down to. Because they're probably hurting. You don't just show up to those rooms and go to those meetings because you feel great.
Oh, 100%. 1,000%.
And if you're showing up to those meetings and you're drunk, you're intoxicated, it's like, obviously your life's not going
in the
well.
worst place to be like, I've been in AA meetings drunk. It is the worst place to be drunk.
The worst. But that's the whole thing. It's like, you gotta make an outreach, right? And how he had explained it to me, my sponsor, is he's like, dude, just go have a conversation with the person. Like, sit down, talk to them, let them know you're a normal person. Maybe share some war stories, shoot the shit, and be like, hey man, do you have a sponsor? Like, that's it. And you can't dictate what they're gonna do. There are gonna be people who are like, no, I don't want to do that. And it's like, that's okay. They're not ready yet. But at that point, I was beaten down enough. Had someone like made that extra initiative, I probably would have gone with it. Because we got to remember, like, today I'm not scared. In that moment, I was terrified. I'm not going to reach out to someone and ask them to be my sponsor, right? And there's nothing actually forcing me to get a sponsor. Like, that wasn't a part of probation. Probation was go to the meetings. It's like, okay, I'm going to do that. They're telling me I should get a sponsor all around these rooms, but it's like, nobody's making me. I'm not going to do it. And it's like, I don't like how I'm living, but I don't think that's necessary at this point. And had I done that, maybe it wouldn't have worked, right? Like, maybe I still would have drank again. There's no guarantees, but it would have probably planted a stronger seed, and I would have known there's a different way to live life. So that's something that I try to do today. And if I saw myself sitting in that room, I like to think I would. I might not. I mean, I'm not a perfect person. I don't go up to every single person who looks like they're having a hard time in AA and offer to sponsor them. Otherwise, I'd have so many sponsees I couldn't live a life. But it's just, when you see it, you know. Like, you get that calling where it's like, I got to talk to this guy. I was like, I got to go talk to him and be like, hey, what's up?
Sometimes they come to you.
Sometimes they come to you.
Like when I told you the other day about the guy at the gas station, like that's a situation that just materialized out of thin air. Like, that's like another thing where it's like, that was just like, God was just like, I don't think you've been reaching out to enough people, so I'm going to deliberately put one right in your path. Like, one is going to collide with you in the most unusual of circumstances and, like, turn out. I mean, I do want to share the story a little bit, if you don't mind.
No, please do. It was great. I loved it when you told me.
Yeah, so this past Wednesday, I'm on my way to a meeting that I go to every Wednesday night. And there's a gas station next to the building where this meeting is at. And so I pull into this gas station, and I'm wearing a shirt from Alexa. Shout out to Alexa. I'm wearing this shirt, and it says, "Say nope to dope," right? Super simple shirt. And I'm waiting in line to use the self-checkout thing at the gas station to, like, buy this energy drink. And I've got, like, 6 minutes before this, like, meeting starts, but it's right across the street. And this older guy just taps me on the shoulder, and this dude's carrying a 12-pack of Bud Light. And he taps me on the shoulder, and he's like, "Hey man, like, what does your shirt say?" And I, like, turn around, like, "Say nope to dope," you know, like. And he's like, "Oh, that's a good shirt. Like, where did you buy it? Like, is it from a store out here?" And he starts asking me, like, all these questions about this shirt. And I was like, "No, actually, like, my friend makes it. She sells them online." And, like, without even using any context clues, I was like, "Yeah, dude, I'll give you her Instagram and, like, the links in the bio." And this old dude's like, 55. He's like 55, 60. And I was like, "Yeah, it's on her Instagram. She has an Etsy store." And he's like, "What does that even mean?" And I was just like, "Okay." And this dude asked me, he literally is like, "Well, you check out," and he's like, "I'll meet you at your car in the parking lot." And I'm like, "Dog, like, I'm late. I don't know, dude. Like, this dude, I don't." So I leave and I go stand by my car, right? And he walks out of the store and he meets me by my car in the parking lot, and he's asking me, like, "Where do I buy this shirt?" And so I call Alexa, and I'm like, "Hey, like, I ran into this guy at the gas station. He saw me wearing this shirt. He wants to buy a couple." So I have her on speakerphone. So he's all like, "Yeah, let me get your information, blah, blah, blah." So she gives him her information so they can, like, you know, connect later and he can buy a shirt. And he's talking to her on speakerphone. And he goes, "Oh, by the way, man, like, what's your name?" And I was like, "Eric." And he goes, "My name is Eric." We were both Eric. Didn't really think anything of it. And then he asked Alexa on the phone, he's like, "What's your name?" And she goes, "Alexa." And he goes, "That's my daughter's name." And that was like, at that point, I was like, is it odd or is it God? You know, this guy wants to buy a couple of Say Nope to Dope shirts. His name's Eric. My name's Eric. He's buying them from Alexa. His daughter's name is Alexa. And, you know, but that was that, right? I had to get to the meeting. I was like, "Hey, man, I got to run. You got her information, whatever." Well, I go to the meeting, and about halfway through, Alexa texts me, and she goes, "Hey, I just talked with this guy for a little bit. He said he wants some more information about, like, recovery and whatnot. I told him a little bit about you and gave him your information." So I was like, okay. And so I go home, and I'm just editing some stuff for, like, TikTok or whatever. It's like 9:30 at night, and I get a call, and it's from this guy. And he calls me, and he's, like, pretty drunk, like, on the phone, but, like, he's like, it sounds like he's, like, tearing up. And this guy, complete stranger that I met at the gas station, proceeds for the next 45 minutes just telling me, like, his whole life story. You know what I mean? Like, really, like, opening up to me and, like, you know, telling me about, like, some of the struggles that he's going through, and, like, that at one point in time, like, back where he's from, like, he used to, like, work a 12-step program, and, like, he had moved out to Arizona, and he just didn't have anywhere to get plugged into, and, like, didn't know anybody, and he starts telling me like all of these things, and at the end of it he goes and he was like, by the way, like, and I'm just listening. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, as much as I wanted to like intervene, because I'm very much that person where it's like I'll hear someone telling their story and it's like I want to like interrupt them and be like, oh, me too, but it's like I'm trying my best to just like be just like ears for this guy and not like whatever to like and also I was like, oh, I don't want to scare him off, you know what I mean? So like this whole time I'm thinking to myself like, this is wild, you know what I mean? Like, and so afterwards he's like, and I'm like, hey man, well, I'm glad you have my information, like if you ever want to talk or whatever, you have my number. And he goes, you wouldn't happen to know like where I can get a book or like blah, like where I can like find a meeting, blah blah. And I was just like, as a matter of fact, I do. I was just like, as a matter of fact, I like to fancy myself as someone who does know quite a bit. And so we start having that conversation, and he like asked me to like help him out and stuff, but it just blows my mind because I'm on my way to like a meeting, and this is the day before my birthday, right? And like I meet this guy named Eric, whose daughter's name is Alexa, who meets me, Eric, to buy a shirt from Alexa, and then turns out like he has like this whole other backstory, and it's like, who would have thought this like dude that's going on like into his 60s, you know what I mean? Like completely different background from back east, like God put him right in my path and was just like, you're gonna help this guy out. And I've talked to him every day since Wednesday night. He's called me every day. And another like little thing, he lives like 5 minutes up the street from where this studio is at. But it's like, that's the kind of stuff, man, where it's like, if we're not careful and we become disconnected from God, we miss out on those kind of things in life, right? But when we're doing what we're supposed to, and like we're putting in the work for ourselves and in our lives, those kind of things seemingly just happen. And it's like, when we're prepared for them, it's like we have the opportunity to like build real connections with people and like maybe like really help people out. And like that's like the cool thing about like it's not just about like living a better life for me. It's like, you never know who you'll run into at a gas station who might need your help more than you could have ever imagined. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to share that because that was just a super wild story that happened to me this week. Real quick, while we wrap up here, for any listeners, we've received a couple of DMs on Instagram and TikTok this week of people just like reaching out, asking for like resources and trying to learn a little bit more about what we're doing. For anybody who's like a prospective newcomer or like early in sobriety, do you have any like advice or any words for them?
Just do it. No. Dude, you gotta.
That is trademarked by Nike. No, I'm just saying.
Honestly, I just think when I was in Arizona, first starting to do this process, when I was calling treatment centers, I literally just Googled like drug and alcohol treatment centers, and was just calling them all and basically base that entire decision off of who I talked to and how they sounded. Like, does this sound like a genuine person who actually gives two shits about me? Because, I mean, I called one and I remember them saying, like, oh, yeah, we have an open bed. And that was all they told me. I'm like, I'm not fucking, I don't care if you have an open, like, what do you do? And honestly, I was looking for detox. So my first suggestion is, if you need detox, like, I was a super heavy drinker. Medically, I needed to be supervised detoxing off of alcohol. Like, I had tried it at home. And I mean, my heart would race at like 160, 170 while I'm sitting on the couch. I'd be profusely sweating. And the fear of like, if I have a seizure in my apartment by myself and die, like no one's going to find me. Like no one's going to know for weeks. I'm just going to be gone. And that would be my first suggestion. Do you need medical detox? Because you should absolutely seek that first and foremost. Like you should not try to just cut cold and dry if you're doing something that's actually dangerous to cut off of. And then, I mean, dude, just look up AA, CA, HA, whatever it is you think you're going to relate to the most, and just show up. Like that's the first step. Just show up. Even if you're not able to string together good sober time, regardless, if you just keep showing up, eventually that seed's going to get planted. Get a sponsor. Work the steps. Read your big book. Figure out how you got to pray and how you got to meditate and start adding that into your life. Like that's really it. Like that's the program. That is sobriety. If I do those things, I will stay sober. My life will get better. So I mean that would be my suggestion.
Boom.
Mic
drop. Well, thank you, man, for stopping by. You know what time it is. Huge shout out to our sponsor, Plugged In Recovery. We are officially in the Plugged In studio. Haven't quite figured out exactly what we're going to do with it, but it looks a little bit better than last week, and hopefully next week it looks a little bit better than this week, and we're continuing making progress. Just hit 20 subscribers on YouTube. What? Now we're going to 30. So don't be shy. Subscribe at Otter God Pod on YouTube. Make sure to hit the little bell thing so you get notifications. And once we post every Friday, you can go on there and comment on the video and maybe even give it a thumbs up. And then you'll find us on TikTok, and you'll like all of our TikToks and repost them. And then you'll find us on Instagram. And the cool thing is we made it real simple. It's at Otter God Pod on all platforms. And then once you get off social media, you'll go ahead and find us on Spotify, and you'll give us a follow there. You'll listen to the whole episode before going over to Apple Podcasts and doing the same exact thing, just so you can support us on all 3 major streaming platforms. But if you choose just one of them, that would be just fine.
That's a mouthful, dude.
Yeah, you know what time it is. You gotta promote yourself these days a little bit. Sure. Get the word out there. We've got 20 loyal people that are watching our stuff, and that's pretty freaking cool. He's one of them. Yeah. And also just a quick shout out to my boy Drew. Go Cardinals. We'll see you guys next week.
All right, later, guys.